I go now?
For the number of lessons you've had, you ought to be ready for Wimbledon.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today I'm joined by Felipe Capella, who is the president and co-founder of Loadsmart. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Scott. My pleasure.
All right. So you've been a corporate advisor, a professor teaching courses on bankruptcy, restructuring, and commercial law to now running a tech startup. But I want to, if you could kind of help us to understand your background and how that eventually evolved to what you're doing today.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm actually originally from Brazil, where I practiced law for 6 or 7 years, moved to New York City, practiced law there at Sullivan and Cromwell for about 2 years, then moved to Washington, D.C., and helping the Inter-American Development Bank, advising them on sovereign guaranteed operations in Latin America. So after 10 or 11 years of this corporate world, I thought it was time, giving a certain career maturity, that I could go back to my earlier passion of really starting something from scratch, right, and trying something completely new outside of this corporate world.
Now, why Loadsmart? Well, first of all, tell us what Loadsmart is and how does it help shippers move their freight faster and carriers keep trucks full? And how did you transition into this particular opportunity?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about how we identify the opportunity. So my partner Ricardo and I were analyzing several different industries and trying to be very pragmatic on starting our new venture. We took a look at healthcare, finance, but when we look at trucking or freight specifically, we thought, oh, this is it, right? It is a $800 or $900 billion industry in the United States, highly fragmented. So you have hundreds of thousands of shippers on one side, what we call the demand side. On the supply side, we have at least 250,000 trucking companies, 96% of them with less than 10 trucks. So really, really fragmented. And in the middle, you have these brokers, around 15 to 17,000 of them, trying to intermediate and add value to both sides, and zero technology. Right. When we started a company back in 2014, in order for a trucking company to commit to move a load, they were requesting us to send a fax to their office. So they wanted to see a physical thing coming into their office, and we say like, no, I'll send you an email, a PDF. They're like, PD what? So it was a very, very a low tech industry, and given the size and fragmentation, we thought this was a great industry to join.
So we're gonna I think look at it a little bit more deeply in just a few minutes, but this is quite interesting in the sense that while the total addressable market is very large, and of course the need is very much there, it's still very much a legacy analog world. So how did you guys think through really the change in behavior and the market receptivity to embracing new forms of technology that ultimately is going to force them to change habits?
Yeah, if we step back and we try to analyze how shippers move loads in the United States, right? And by loads, I mean, this is like a B2B business. I'm not talking about parcels and boxes. I'm talking about 45,000 pounds of widgets or watermelons, right? And most people think or believe that shippers have their own fleets to move all of their loads. That's actually not true, right? So most loads actually move by third-party trucking companies. Because if you think about from a shipper perspective, if they have a factory in Los Angeles, right, manufacturing widgets, and they have a customer in Chicago, they have a truck to go from LA in Chicago, that's great. But this truck has to go back from Chicago to LA, right? And if the shipper has its own fleet, it has no other factory in Chicago. It was just delivering a cargo to a customer. So he's going to have to go all the way back to LA empty, right? So that's why we have freight brokers that try to provide this trucking service from LA to Chicago. And in the way back, brokers find another shipper, right, that has a load from Chicago back to LA to bring this truck back to the headquarters. So when we analyze how shippers were looking for trucking companies and looking for brokers, we realized it was all manual, right? So meaning that if a shipper needed to move 10 loads in the next few days of widgets from LA, they would just call a broker and say like, hey, broker, I have these 10 loads that need to be moved from LA, 5 of them going to Chicago, 3 of them going to Miami, 1 of them going to New York, so forth. And please find trucks for me and give me prices. And then the broker would say like, okay, wait a little bit. I'll call some of my trucking companies that I work with. And it will be just like this phone game, right? Trying to find the right trucks and right carriers to move each load. But remember, there are 250,000 carriers out there, right? More than 1 million trucks for hire. So it's not humanly possible to call all of them. So even if you find a good one, it's not going to be the optimal one, right? And we thought this phone tag game was actually pretty similar, if you remember, Scott, back in the 80s and 90s when the stock was being sold and bought in the stock for exchange, right? You saw all these guys screaming at each other, say like, oh, I want to buy 200 shares of Apple. And the guy would scream back, no, I can sell you 150 and this is the price. So very, very inefficient. And then from the 2000s on, nowadays you can just jump in, sell or buy a stock with a few clicks, right? So we realized, okay, that there should be a better way for shippers to be able to move their loads across the United States. And there should be a better way for carriers to plan and keep their trucks full.
So I want to kind of explore this notion of creating this marketplace. So for Loadsmart to really create this buy side and the sell side signals in almost a real time fashion, it required the ability to be able to actually get participants from all the parties, the multi-stakeholders, to participate, add their information, keep it up to date so that people are actually seeing, valuable data. So can you talk about how you guys over time built that and what were some of the challenges in the beginning?
That's a great question, Scott, because one of the examples that we liked a lot were the like orbits of the world, right? Priceline, right? You go there, you check, you just give information about the city that you're in, where you want to go, and you can buy. You see an immediate price to purchase a flight ticket, right? But what happens is that when you enter your 2 cities there in orbits or Priceline website, what they do is that they get your information, look at their supply side, right? And their supply side, they have 10, 20, 30 billion dollar companies, right? Large airlines, very sophisticated, right? They fly planes, so plenty of sophistication there. They generate their own pricing algorithm. They know exactly how many seats they have available, and they send the price back to Orbitz. So Orbitz just display that back to you on your screen, and that's beautiful. When we try to do the same thing when we started the company in 2014, 2015, is that when we look at our supply side, we didn't see 20, 30 billion dollar companies. We saw, again, 200,000 companies, mom and pop shops using zero technology. So we didn't have this real-time availability, real-time pricing from the supply side. So what we decided to do is that if we cannot get real-time capacity and real-time pricing, let's just create our own. Let's just create our own algorithm and let's take principal risk. So the way that we kind of hacked the system was because we didn't have the supply side data, is that we were estimating ourselves based on hundreds of data points, right? And building an algorithm that would learn with time. And we were taking the risk of the transaction. So if the shipper was saying like, hey, I need to move a cargo from LA to Miami, picking up on Saturday morning, and it has to be a refrigerated trailer and I need the price right now. So our algorithm kicks in and it tries to estimate, okay, how much do I think is going to cost me to hire a trucking company on Saturday from this city to that city, and we display the price to the shipper. If the shipper likes it, they book, and that's it. So it's my responsibility to move that load for that price. That was the way that we found to kind of hack the supply side, right? Because of lack of data and technology.
Well, that's really interesting because I mean it's almost like akin to doing derivatives in a hedge fund, right? So you're effectively transferring some of the liability onto you or onto your books, which meant that somebody would have to fund the difference in terms of the pricing. So that's certainly challenging. But I wonder, from that approach to eventually getting the mom and pop, the SMEs, on board, what were the incentives that were created so that these many fragmented small players would actually want to start using apps and different ways to enter this information?
You may also like our quarterly Ask Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit astroperkins.com/events.
Yeah, I think the incentive that they have right now is that a lot of the market is migrating to the cloud, right? So it's very interesting because you talk to most people, and I used to believe that as well. Right now, it's like everything is in the cloud, right? All companies are in the cloud. That's actually not true, especially for trucking, right? So when we created this instant pricing back in 2015, our next thing was to create our API, because our strategy was to hook up this instant pricing, instant capacity to large shippers' software, right? What we call TMS systems, transportation management systems. So we wanted to hook it up there, and then we would receive all the requests automatically, right, from a TMS. I need to move all these loads from all these places to all these places automatically, and then we would price everything and send it back automatically, right? And that was done in 2016. And then when we approached big shippers and big TMSs to hook it up our cable there, they're saying like, hey, we are sorry, we have an on-premise version of this TMS. We're not on the cloud. So from 2016 to 2018, we suffered a lot, Scott. That was tough because we had the cables, we had the technology, and there's no way that we could plug our cable into anything else in the industry. But from 2018 to 2021, right now, we saw a lot of these TMSs migrating to the cloud, a lot of really large shippers abandoning their on-premise version of these kind of softwares and becoming totally on the cloud. And then we started to receive all this information automatically and instantaneously. So right now, for example, in Q4, we have seen via integrations more than $1.4 billion of freight opportunity for us to move. And now 85% of our the freight that we move, of our revenues, are fully automated because, again, I'm working with the algorithms, right? And sending back the prices directly to shippers. So that has happened on the shipper side. So in the past 2 or 3 years, this migration to the cloud, which for us has been beautiful, right? Because again, then we can really put our technology to use. What's happening right now is the start of the migration of carriers to the cloud. So carriers are now starting to use software in the cloud to do load planning, for example. Up to now, actually, most of the carriers today still use like a human being to try to send their trucks around the US. And there's someone in the office, right, responsible for a fleet of 10, 20 trucks, saying, okay, these 10 trucks are arriving over here, these 3 trucks are arriving over there at this different date, and I have to find a new load coming from those places that they're arriving to. Right, but everything is very manual. So they look at several different websites to find loads, call a lot of people, receive a lot of calls, and using a load planning software. Now they're adding this information online. Now the cloud knows where these trucks are going to be, right? And now the cloud via integration starts to tell companies like Loadsmart, A fleet, for example, tells us, I'm going to have these 10 trucks arriving at these 10 different cities in the next few days. Do you have any loads that match this profile? And then our algorithm searches back on the demand side that we already have. Remember that we integrated this past 3 years, and say like, okay, there's a perfect load for this truck that is arriving in Chicago on Saturday morning and needs to go back to the headquarters in Miami. I found a perfect load from whatever, Starbucks, Walmart, P&G, right?
So as I'm listening, I think there's some really just incredibly valuable insights for lots of startups and entrepreneurs to take away. This really thinking outside of the box approach around the pricing when before that data was available, and taking some of the risk. And then of course, this notion of timing. Timing is everything. Where if you were too early, let's say 7 years early, you would have had to wait a long time before the shippers would get into the cloud and then eventually the carriers. But you were early enough, but not too early, but still had to go through some, kind of a difficult period nonetheless. But then because you were early enough that when things started to, like the TMS and now the carriers are starting to go online, you now have almost a total picture of both the supply and demand side. And then of course, what that means is, not just the human driven cars, but as we start to see more fleets of autonomous vehicle trucks, it's just going to get better and better. And at some point, it's going to be fully automated. And this is a perfect reflection as to why you guys raised a pretty substantial Series C round of $90 million, because of exactly these kind of macro pieces coming together.
Don't forget to visit astroperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Julianne Hough, actress, dancer, and winner of Dancing with the Stars; Damian Vaughn, former NFL player; Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astroperkins.com and click on Events.
I have a lot of momentum exactly because of the things that you mentioned, Scott, and you nailed when you talked about timing, right? And we were almost too early if you think about that, Scott, because again, as I was mentioning, from 2016 to 2018, we had the technology, the APIs ready to integrate and nothing to integrate with, right? And we could withstand those 2 years, right, building on the products or advancing our technology. But imagine if I had started a company 2 years before, 2012, 2011, I'm not sure we would have made it. I was even reading one of these days, a research paper that they're trying to analyze hundreds of startups, trying to know what is the number one difference between success and failure. And the reason was actually timing, which was very surprising for a lot of people. And for us, was actually not, because we lived through it, right? And I think a second point that I think is a valuable lesson as well is that a lot of times startups focus a lot on the product itself, right? And they disregard or forget about distribution, right? A lot of our strategy was actually based on distribution, right? Instead of like calling shippers and asking for loads and giving prices via phone, we plugged in our algorithm in several TMSs for hundreds of shippers and started like to distribute our prices automatically. This is a distribution game, right? So distribution is as much important to a startup than the product itself.
Oh, absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Share with us a little bit about the product roadmap, as well as maybe even the expansion or sales roadmap, as you guys are starting to deploy some of that Series C and get into hyper growth phase.
Yeah, I think what we're launching right now, based on the Series C boost that we got from our Series C round led by BlackRock, it's really focusing on mode optimization, because shippers usually make decisions on modes. I'm talking about over the road, truck, right, rail, air, a lot of different ways of moving your cargo around. So they make these decisions based on annual projections, right? For example, a factory may say like, hey, I need these parts to arrive at my factory just in time, right? I don't have an inventory, so I need these loads to be delivered on time. I cannot afford a service to be late. Therefore, I know there are rail congestions out there sometimes, right? And I cannot afford delays. So I'm going to move all my loads via truck, every single one of them, right? Because I don't want to run this risk. But what happens is that now Loadsmart, for example, has real-time data, not only on trucks, availability, price, but also on the rail side. So I know what is the congestion, what is the if they're on time or not, how much is going to cost, and I can start providing to the shippers this optionality, saying like, hey, for this specific load over here, why don't you move them via rail? Because there's no congestion right now. The price is 13% cheaper, and you can save X amount of CO2 emissions, which is now very important for a lot of large shippers. So we're now bringing our integration that started on the trucking side and bringing the rail side in order to give shippers this kind of real-time, instantaneous decision making. And we're allowing shippers either to make these decisions by themselves, meaning presenting, hey, here's your rail option, here's your truck option, these are the prices, these are the own delivery or service levels, or we're also offering an automated business decision. So the shipper tells us what is most important for them. Well, for me, it's 40% price, 30% on-time delivery, and the rest is environmental impact. And then our algorithm makes the decision by itself on an ongoing basis. So for really large shippers that move hundreds of loads per day, they don't have to have one decision maker analyzing all the numbers for every single load. The system makes automatic decisions.
Very, very exciting. And I think in many ways it's a logical next step, but also for you guys as a company, it really expands the total opportunity as you guys get into rail. And of course, for carriers, it's a mode alternative, substitute, and that gives them a tremendous amount of visibility that they didn't have before. Again, these two are just, I would imagine, tip of the iceberg. There's many modes I'm sure, to be added, and new ones to be introduced as we get into drone deliveries and other forms of even underneath ground types of transportation. Who knows? So with that, I've been joined by Felipe Capella, who is the president of Loadsmart. Thanks for joining us today.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.